Hi, my name's Amelia Chemister and I'm from OurSay. We're an online democracy organisation and today we're at the University of Melbourne. For the past 6 weeks, we've been working with the University of Melbourne and the Centre for Sustainability Leadership on the Leadership for Change Forum. We asked the public to post questions to 5 leaders and decision makers from the fields of law, banking, Indigenous health, zoos and the environment. Today, we are going to get the answers to the 3 most popular questions from the forum from our panel of leaders. Let's go check it out.
Thank you very much for coming along this evening to the Leadership for Change response event in partnership with the University of Melbourne, the Centre for Sustainability Leadership and OurSay. Before we begin tonight, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of the land. I would also like to pay respect to the elders both past and present of the Kulin Nation and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians who are present this evening. And hopefully in the spirit of those who have come before us and taken care of this land for thousands of years, we can help shape our future and secure it for generations to come, starting with conversations like the one we're about to have this evening. So for the past 6 weeks, people around Melbourne and the country have been posting and voting for questions to our expert panel on the topic of sustainability and how we can actually address the demands of leading a sustainable future. The Leadership for Change Forum, hosted by oursay.org, in partnership with the University of Melbourne and the Centre for Sustainability Leadership, want to know what change making means in Australia and how we can do things differently. There's been an incredible amount of enthusiasm for this forum where we've had 66 really interesting questions on a wide range of topics, over 1,000 votes and upwards of 400 comments on the forum. So let's get straight into it and I'll introduce our esteemed panel. To my immediate right we have Professor Kerry Arabina, the Chair for Indigenous Health and the Professor and Director of the Onemda Vic Health Koori Health Unit. She is also the Director of Indigenous Health Research in the School for Indigenous Health at Monash University. A descendant of the Meriam people of the Torres Strait and a former social worker with a doctorate in human ecology, Professor Arabina has extensive background in public health, administration, community development and research, working in senior roles in social justice, human rights, access and equity. She was a founding co-chair of the new national Indigenous peak body, the National Congress of Australia's First People, a collective voice to lobby governments on Indigenous issues. Welcome, Kerry.
Thank you.
Secondly, we have Jeanette O'Neill, Head of Corporate Responsibility at the National Australia Bank. She is a leading corporate responsibility professional with 16 years experience, working as a consultant and internally with large multinationals in Australia and Europe. Currently heading up the Corporate Responsibility Unit at NAB, she manages strategy, governance, issues management, communications, stakeholder engagement, performance management and reporting. Prior to joining NAB, Jeanette also worked as a strategy consultant with Accenture and as a sustainability consultant with PwC UK. Please welcome Jeanette. Thirdly, we have Professor Kate Aughty, the Victorian Commissioner for Environmental Sustainability. Kate has an extensive legal and academic background, having first worked as a magistrate in Western Australia and now Victoria, where she's established the first Victorian Koori Court and acted as an inaugural Koori Court magistrate. She's undertaken a number of consultancies, including projects on local government and climate change. And Professor Aughty was appointed in 2009 as the Victorian Commissioner for Environmental Sustainability. And prior to her current appointment, she has held positions at La Trobe University and has also served as a chairperson of the Victorian Ministerial Reference Council for Climate Change. Welcome, Kate. And finally, we have Jennifer Gray, the CEO of Zoos Victoria. She has a background in transportation, engineering and ethics, which provide a unique set of skills undoubtedly to tackle the challenges of transforming the 3 zoos of Zoos Victoria. Jenny's career history boasts a strong mix of commercial and public sector roles, and she currently holds a master's degree in ethics, engineering and business administration, and is currently involved in a PhD at the University of Melbourne. Please welcome our panel. And to give a quick background about what OurSay is, we're an independent online democracy organisation that seeks to better connect you, the citizens, with such esteemed panellists as we have here tonight. Let's get straight into the questions. We're going to work from the 3rd most popular question and then get to the most popular question from the OurSay community. So, the 3rd place question, which comes from Greta Oost, is: how can we work with governments, businesses and the public to deliver an attractive, design-driven solution to drinking bottled water and its associated plastic waste and environmental problem? And Greta provides some context for her question. Bottled water is everywhere and uses a lot of unnecessary resources for something that comes also out of a tap. but when out and about, it's so much easier to buy bottled water than to refill your own water bottle. For example, in Melbourne CBD, there's one drinking fountain for every 20,000 people, and on Chapel Street, there's no fountain at all. On top of that, the fountains are not very attractive, so our options are Evian, Fiji Water or Mount Franklin in fancy bottles, promoted by supermodels versus hard-to-find, urinal-resembling stainless steel water fountains that many of us perceive as unhygienic. So how can we work with governments, businesses and the public to deliver a solution to this pressing problem? And I hand over to our panel, Kerry.
Goodness me, I had the opportunity the other day to spend some time with Michael Kirkby, and since he's finished his most former role, he has been very explicit in what it means to be a citizen and what it means to participate in democracy. And one of the things that he said was, we the citizens have to make our will be known. And it gave me a point of reflection, really, is how do we actually make our will be known around some of these things when we're not just up against governments and private companies who are talking about bottled water. What we're up against is globally invested big multinational companies who are exploiting water resources from Indigenous peoples predominantly around the world, who have had market failures in other countries and are now looking to really refine their products. So there are a whole range of things that seem to be against we the citizens. And it is a real struggle to make our will be known in that context. So I was just taking a moment to reflect then on what we do in our communities when we are up against what seems to be an insurmountable barrier, and then the kinds of strategies that we put in place. And of course, whilst they might manifest locally, they are absolutely regionally connected, nationally and internationally connected. So what we often do, first of all, is make sure that we do the lobbying in an international forum such as the UN to make sure that there is a covenant which we can hold governments accountable for. We then instigate grassroots action, and often that action is governed by some kind of charter that a whole range of people and citizens can muster around. We then use combinations of legislation, infrastructure and behaviour change, and that has generated fantastic effects, particularly in the delivery of, for example, community-controlled health organisations. We've had whole people movements protesting against oppression around native title and a whole range of other things. But we've also seen it be enacted really well in public health campaigns. For example, head injuries in hospitals as a result of car accidents, that precipitated a movement towards, in the last 30 years, bringing about the use of seat belts and making sure that people were able to use them, and there was a combination of legislation, infrastructure and behaviour change. Now it just feels unnatural if you jump into a car and you start driving and you haven't got your seatbelt on. There's also great examples in the Clean Up Australia movement where you've had a combination of legislation around the act of putting rubbish everywhere else except in a bin, behaviour change and infrastructure, making sure that good infrastructure was available so that people could waste respectfully. So in amongst all of those things, what I would suggest in this regard is absolutely we need a treaty on water. We need to understand that water commons are an intrinsic value of Earth and all of its species. It can't be commodified. It can't be bought or sold or traded for profit. It is a shared legacy, a public trust and a fundamental right and a collective responsibility. And if we start off from that frame, then there is a whole range of other things that can and do happen. So we can actually fight against the privatisation of water services. We can go and talk to private companies around changing, signing on to a treaty in the first instance and then changing their behaviour around that. We can then hand it over to a whole range of stunning young people or older people who are also stunning, just quietly. But we can then sort of start getting that design effort happening around alternatives. And it might be something as simple as refill stations where you can take really attractively designed sexy little stainless steel water bottles there and refill them. You can use alternative to plastics that do decompose. For example, there are some really fantastic corn and soy-based products that have now nearly been perfected, so bringing them on quickly. And then you can legislate, increase taxes on water bottles, make sure that the monies in that profit margin goes back into modifying or creating alternatives for water supply in and around Melbourne. But then you have a greater impact. So what happens globally is enacted locally and vice versa. So they're some of the contributions I would make in that space.
Thank you very much, Kerry.